Debbie, thank you so much for taking time to speak with me today for our Speaking Truth to You series. And my first question for you is, what in your youth led you to become an activist?
It's interesting because I didn't grow up thinking of myself as an activist or even knowing what that word really meant. But in hindsight, I realized I was raised with values that shaped the activist in me long before I even knew that term, right? I grew up as a tomboy outside, building forts, climbing trees, playing in the woods. And really, that was my first experience of freedom. Back then it wasn't called hiking. It was really just joy. And as I got older, I drifted away from that connection. And it wasn't until I reconnected with the outdoors and it was introduced to hiking in 2019 that I realized just how rare that kind of joy in nature is portrayed for people who look like me. And that's when the mission really became clear. My parents, especially my dad, played a huge role in my upbringing. He was a fearless leader in the business and also in the community, and he raised me with courage to speak up when something wasn't right, and he didn't just tell me, he modeled it. Only later did I learn that even with his youth, he tells me stories about when he was younger and how he was somewhat of an activist in his own way. So I guess it was always in me, right? This blend of like joy, justice, and leadership. So my activism didn't come from a single moment. It grew from a lifetime of knowing like what feels right and bringing others along with me. For me, it kind of, my mindset is going towards like racism, within the community. So I grew up in a predominantly white community. My father's Black. He's from Gambia. He's, an African. So he's very dark. He had an accent growing up, and he was a business owner within the community I grew up, within the Edwardsville community. There were often times in his career with the business where there was customers who didn't want him to make their food, so he'd have to get his colleague, this white lady, Melanie, pull her in, would you make this person's food? But even though he saw that racism and he felt it, he would still continue to treat people like decent human beings. He would treat everyone like family, and he would tell me a story of this guy that would come in, and for the longest time he would always say, I don't want him making my food, and my dad just continued to show him love, continued to treat him well. And over the years, the guy, he stopped. It kind of grew away from him. And one day he even shook my dad's hand and he just told him how much he appreciated how he treated him and his family. So it's really this that it's that courage, that I saw firsthand, and I saw my dad work through it and continue to do what was right even in those tough situations. The restaurant industry, it could be, some people they work 7 days a week,
Right.
and people are quitting left and right, and depending on your role it could be very hands-on, very stressful. And just having an outlet, I don't think I realized how much I needed the outdoors and I needed that sense of peace and that sense of healing until I stepped outside. And we had got a new puppy. I lived with my parents. We had got a new puppy, Brownie. She was actually a stray rescue we saw on the news, and we said, "Oh my gosh, we want her." So we got her this puppy, and we live on 10 acres, and we needed a fence built. So we commissioned my childhood friend Matt, who I literally grew up next to. So when I was talking about building forts and playing in the woods, like that was me, Matt, and my twin brother Bobby. Like we were like the three amigos, right? And I hadn't seen Matt almost in probably 10 years. And he's an avid outdoorsman. He's a white male. He hikes, he camps, he does all that stuff. So I just mentioned to him one day while he's building this fence, I just said, "Hey, I've always wanted to go hiking." I don't know how it came up. I just mentioned it, and he was like, "Oh, me and my wife, we hike all the time." So he's like, "We'll invite you out." So literally a couple days later, he invited me out, and it was me and Brownie, and then him and his wife, and they had a new puppy as well. And the trail we went on, it was very short. It was less than 2 miles, Castlewood State Park in Baldwin, Missouri. And it was so exhilarating, so freeing, and I just wanted that feeling again. So the next Sunday, he wasn't available. I went with his wife, and the next Sunday she wasn't available, and they had taught me an All Trails app, so how to use the app to find trails. So I went out with someone else, with a friend, and I just continued it every single Sunday. I just wanted that feeling, that rejuvenation.
So how did you get the word out to people who look like you to think about hiking and enjoy the outdoors?
It's funny because Matt, and he would always tell me, like, stop taking so many photos. Like, you need to be present. You need to enjoy the moment. I was taking these photos and we were smiling, and Matt would be like, and they're not authentic. He was like, you need to take photos of like people going up the hill and like grunting and like these aren't real photos, he would say. And I just was like, so I just kept taking these photos, these black, joyful photos, right? And I started posting them on social media, on Instagram. Black people who hike. We're black and we're hiking because I wasn't seeing that. And I was reaching out to friends and they were like, black people doesn't don't do this. So I just started posting photos and showcasing that beautiful representation of us out in nature. And literally strangers would just start commenting and DMing me and like, how can we join? And that's really how the movement started. It was just me showcasing the joy that me and my small group of people that were hiking with me, and strangers started reaching out, and it went from like a weekly text group to an email group to an official like MailChimp sign up, and it just really became this movement, and we call it the We Hike Too movement, and it's a national movement to get Black people active and outside in nature.
What continues as you go forward to give you courage and hope?
For me, it's the impact. It's really knowing the difference that I'm making, the difference that this community that I've created is making for people, right? Black people are finding joy in nature. Black people are finding community. They're finding healing. I don't know how often, when I'm out hiking with people and they're having these new experiences and they're sharing with me just how they finally feel like they belong out in this space, right? Like we have some people that would come out that are brand new to the outdoors and they're like, wow, this feels great. How come I've never done it? Right? Like it's like the best kept secret. And then we have other people and they've been hiking, but they've never been in a space where they can look around and there's people that look like them. So they always kind of felt like out of place. Sometimes they might have even felt unsafe, but there was always kind of this sense of like not really belonging in here. And we actually just came from the Smoky Mountains a couple weeks ago,
Wow.
and we do a national park tour every year. We go to different national parks. We were in the national park and we had my leadership team, which is about 17 of us at the time, and then we had about 15 attendees. They were like breakthrough moments, right? These attendees were there for 3, 4 days. And at the end, we had everyone kind of come up and they shared like how this experience impacted them. We were crying for hours. Like everybody was just crying and people were just pouring out just about how like one, it was such a vulnerable space and just people felt seen, people felt heard, people had never felt this type of community, the sense of belonging. Like people were like, I finally found my space. Like I finally found my people. It's really hard to explain, but one of our videographers, he told me once that like this isn't just an organization, this is like a portal. And he's like, everyone that goes through it, they come out different on the other side. And I believe that. When you think about it, nature essentially is a free resource, right?
Right.
So when you think about, things that cost, everything is so expensive, and you talk about healthcare and mental health and like nature is essentially free. If there's a certain group of people that don't feel like that space is for them, whether that's like the lack of representation that they see, the feeling that they get when they're out there, the feeling whether they're not seeing people or they're being treated differently, and the accessibility, like it really it all makes a difference. But it really goes back to again like that childhood, like that sense of freedom. It really is kind of childlike, right? When you're out walking the trails and you could pick up a rock or you could hug a tree or like
Right.
whatever. And it's just fun and freeing. And I think everyone deserves to feel that.
So what advice do you have for young people?
For young people, really, it's just to start acting on what they believe in, right? You don't need a title, you don't need a platform or a perfect plan. You just start and follow what moves them. When I first started hiking, it was for me, it was for my own self-healing. I didn't know it would become a movement. I didn't know I was doing activism. I was just doing what felt right and what felt true. So really just trusting that and trusting themselves and then also protecting their joy. You know, sometimes activism work can be very heavy. There'll be times where they want to quit. People may not understand your path. I don't know how many times when I first started, people were like, what are you doing? People didn't get it. I had this vision. God gave me this vision. I had this vision, but the people around me, they didn't see the same thing that I saw. But just keep moving forward. And healing is part of the work. You know, they don't have to do it alone. Find your community essentially and build with people. Don't allow yourself to get too low. Again, it could be heavy. Staying true to themselves.
When you hike with groups, do you have guidelines for how to access social media or what they're using with devices?
Yeah. So that's a really great point. So we don't have guidelines per se, but I will tell you that my favorite trails are the ones that you don't have cell phone reception. Because to be honest, when I used to go hike every Sunday, those were the one that was the moment that I really looked forward to was like being out on the trail. My phone doesn't work, so it doesn't matter if the stores are calling me or what's going on in the store. It's gonna have to wait because I'm here and I'm being present and I have no other choice because I can get on my phone if I want to. Now, all of the trails aren't like that. Obviously, if you're hiking more in the city, you will have cell reception. And, you know, I think it's nice to like capture a few photos. You want the memories, but you could definitely put your phone on airplane mode. We always recommend like tell people ahead of time where you're going, where you're hiking, what time you intend to be back, right? Some of the apps too, they even have like safety features like Lifeline where you can have someone tracking you. So there's other safety features where you could essentially still be connected and be disconnected. But I definitely encourage people to just kind of unplug from their phone and get off.
Thanks so much, Debbie.
Okay, take care.